Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Please take a seat. You can tell we're all excited to be back in person. So good morning, everyone. My name is Robertson Jr. I'm the Executive Director of the Community Reinvestment Alliance of South Florida. And as of noon today, will be known as the Community Reinvestment Alliance of Florida. We'll have a special presentation and a special event at lunchtime, so please make sure you stick around. I have some special ladies, the board of directors don't even know about yet. So be sure to stick around for lunch. So again, welcome to our 5th annual summit. Summit22, building for this just economy, $1, one vote at a time. Thank you for attending and welcome back to the in-person event. I'm sure you all are sick of doing Zoom and sick of being shut, but it's good to see all of you all. I'm glad to see all of your smiling faces. I thought I'd keep tradition alive in South Florida by not starting on time. It's a thing in South Florida, you know what I found, in Zoom meetings, even the Zoom meetings, when we didn't have to drive anywhere, we still couldn't start on time. So it's our tradition. We take that as a pride. So those folks who are from out of town and not from South Florida, we always start. The country and its people have been through a lot over the last 2 years, but there's a whole lot of work to do. From racial equality to affordable housing, to transportation, to climate change, to gentrification, to income inequality, or income inequality rather. The work begins with us. We must work for a just economy for all. I would like to thank our sponsors today. With their help is how we get this done. So our community diamond sponsor, First Horizon Bank, appear to the first table. Our community leader, Truist Bank. Our community partners, JP Morgan Chase, City National Bank, Valley National Bank, Comerica Bank. Comerica, I didn't get a woo-woo from you guys. Comerica, beat down inside like that. Now, Wells Fargo Bank, Fifth Third Bank, and our community members, First Bank, Bank of OZK, Children's Services Council of Broward, Regents Bank, Synovus Bank, Bank United, and South State Bank. We thank you all. Thank you very much. I'd also like to thank our members. We'd also like to thank our government entities and government partners, and the government and the community at large, as well as the corporations. Without working as a team, we cannot achieve a just economy. It takes each and every one of us. We have a wonderful day planned, and we look forward to your engagement, your critique, and your comments. Please do not forget that we're doing a raffle that we do every time we do this in person. We did the virtual last year as well. See in the back, it's a $10 raffle for a chance at 2 Miami Heat tickets in the lower bowl. Any game that you want to attend, they have 27 games left, and 20 of those are home games. So any game that you would like to attend, please take a chance. I'm sure you will enjoy the game, especially if you're a Miami Heat fan like I am. So please make sure you take advantage of our breakout session, our correction of our raffle. The drawing will be this afternoon, so you have to be present to win. So I'm trying to hold you captive as long as I possibly can. Again, please make sure you're here at lunchtime. We have a special announcement at lunch. So we look forward to you being here. We want to share our expansion with you. I would like to introduce our host, Janine Sewell. In the past, I've always done this, but it was suggested to me by a colleague that maybe we should have a host, and Janine is perfect. Janine is a go-getter entrepreneur and social linguist turned techie. Born to Jamaican parents, she prides herself on being a global citizen who speaks 3 languages, dances salsa and samba, and has shared meals with strangers in 20 countries. Known as the super connector, Janine lives by the credo, always give more in value than you receive in payment. And trust that genuine relationship building and resilience are the keys to success. On a personal mission to increase access to capital for unestimated founders by demystifying venture capital, Janine has impacted over 4,000 entrepreneurs in the last 2 years. It has been featured in NASDAQ, Business Insider, Cheddar TV, NBC, the Miami Herald, and the cover of Entrepreneur magazine. She is also the greatest lover of Mondays I have ever seen in my life. If you do not follow her on LinkedIn, you gotta check her out on Mondays. If you've been partying all weekend and you dread that Monday, check out Janine. I'm sure it will change your life. So at this time, I want to bring up Ms. Janine Sua, who is our host for the day.
Guys, what's up? How we doing? I heard some music. Did I hear music from y'all? I heard something. No. Oh, I was like, we need some vibes. We need to get it going. I know it's so Cornell's right. I am like borderline crazy, especially after I've had 2 cups of coffee. But welcome everyone. My name is Keenya. I'm super excited to be hosting and be your Chief Vibes Officer for today. When I was here, yeah, it's all the vibes. And I go, woo! That made my heart really happy. I honestly needed that. So today's going to be a day of fun, a lot of breakout sessions. Like this is an opportunity for all of us to connect, to engage, but also to have these important conversations around economic development, around building generational wealth, which is personal to me. And so I'm really looking forward to meeting all of you individually and then of course as a group. Before I bring up my amazing friend Suzanne Jewell, I wanted to just gauge the room quickly. I heard a lot of whoos when it came to banking. So who here is in banking or finance? Got it. Who is in economic development? Yes. Woo! Who's in like the government public sector? Woo! Yes. Anyone else? Because I know we have a lot. Nonprofits. Nonprofits are where it's at, y'all. Y'all gonna be hungry for today. No, that's so to start us off, to just get our minds in the right place, to get centered, to get aligned, we are going to bring up Ms. Suzanne Jewell to do some 5 mindful moments. So Suzanne.
Good morning, everyone, and I want to first and foremost thank you for the fact that you showed up today. So take your right hand and cross it over your left shoulder and give yourself a pat on the back. And now, before we actually pause completely, I actually want you to get up on your feet. Yeah, get on your feet. Plant your right foot firmly on the earth. Plant your left foot firmly on the earth. Put your right hand above your right shoulder, your left hand above your left shoulder. And now be the Black Panther or fearless girl on Wall Street or Wonder Woman. Stand here in all your greatness. All right, I can see that, Josh. You can be strong. Put those hands on that waist and be strong. I want you to do this because this is the first time we're in real life. And for those of you who don't know, mindfulness is about feeling what's going on in your body, not just your mind. Now we are going to take a dignified seat. Let yourself down. And be very intentional about how you sit right now. It matters how you sit to practice 5 minutes of mindful peace. Have a strong back. Be like an oak. Have a soft front. Be like a willow. And as you do that, if it is all available to you, close your eyes and let my voice be your guide. The first thing I want to have you draw your attention to in this moment of peace is to feel your body seated in this chair, no longer in the car, not at your hotel room. Where are you right now? Feel that right foot on the earth, that left foot on the earth. Sense into the fact that there's one planet, one place we all occupy. Recognize right now that there are others on this planet who are not feeling peace this morning. Many who actually need our prayers, our compassion, and our kindness. Place your hand on your heart and check in. What one word is the most prevalent word to describe your heart this morning? Are you excited to be back in person? Maybe it have been anxious, hopeful. And set an intention for your time together today. How will you relate and connect to the other humans, the other hearts, the other minds, and the other feet, who today may also be excited? They may be anxious. They may be hopeful. As we all breathe the same air and our feet touch the very same earth, how you walk as the peace today is how you can walk, work, live, create, and play in a mindful way. Place both your hands together with your thumbs now pressing against your heart in prayer pose. Bow your head to your heart, that short 18-inch journey. Setting that intention. Today I will be open, hopeful, kind. And thank you for coming to pause for peace in a mindful way. May you have a very, very blessed day. Namaste.
I'm not gonna like shock you because I'm calm now. I'm like probably back to center. How do we feel? Do we feel good? Do we feel aligned, present? Next up, I'm going to introduce Mr. Arden Shane, founder and past CRA board chair. Give him an applause, please.
Good morning. It's great to be here with all of you, and as others have said, see you in person. So welcome. I am delighted to be here. A couple years ago, a year and a half ago, my wife moved to Northern Indiana, so it's especially good to be here instead of 16 degrees and snow to be here. The just economy and fair access to resources is something that goes on across the country. We are part of a larger movement, whether it's here in South Florida, in Northern Indiana, or across the country. There are people like us working at this same mission in many communities around the country. Whether it is in urban centers like this, or New York, or LA, or whether it's rural communities in the Midwest or in the mountain states, or whether it's mid-sized cities here and there. This work goes on. What you all do for a fair access to resources, to capital and credit is something that's happening across the country. I might just put a plug in for the National Community Reinvestment Coalition Annual Conference. I'm a member of the board, and so is Cornell. That happens in June in DC, and we would love to have you there. But this morning, it is delightful for me to be able to introduce our keynote speaker this morning, Ms. Keenya Robertson, who I've known for many years, who, and I'm not going to read the whole little bio on page 10. You can do that. Keenya is the president and CEO of HOPE. That's the local organization, or to read it out, Housing Opportunities Project for Excellence. Working on fair housing and fair lending. She is also the board chair of the National Fair Housing Alliance based in Washington, DC. So Keenya has a rooted, real grasp of the issues here in South Florida, but also understands the broader picture from her role as the board chair of the National Fair Housing Alliance. Keenya and I have worked together on numerous things over the years. It is such a great pleasure to welcome Keenya Robertson as our speaker virtually. Welcome, Keenya.
Good morning, everyone. Blessed morning to you all. Thank you so much, Arden. And I would be remiss if I did not also thank Mr. Cornell Cruz with regard to fair housing and Hope Fair Housing events in Miami-Dade and Broward County. Mr. Cruz has always shown up for us and contributed to our programs and presentations. So I have to offer that thanks, and Arden as well for your support and partnership over the years. So not a lot about me, but Hope, for those of you who aren't familiar with us, Hope stands for Housing Opportunities Project for Excellence. We are a full service fair housing organization. We serve Miami-Dade and Broward counties. We were incorporated in 1988 via a grant to the county from US HUD. We've been operating in Broward County for quite some time as well. I think we opened up a physical presence in 1998. And I look forward to being back in the county with you all in person once that's possible. Arden gave me a call and said, listen, I heard about this settlement that Hope reached along with the National Fair Housing Alliance in a case with Fannie Mae or against Fannie Mae, and asked if I would share information about that case. So that's what I'm here to do today, and talk about it a bit. And I'm going to give you some of its background, but also what it means for our service areas today. So with that, I'm going to share this screen. I've got a little presentation for you. So here's a little background. The case involves discrimination in the maintenance and marketing of real estate owned properties, REOs. So on February 7th, Hope, along with the National Fair Housing Alliance, who led the entire investigation and case, as well as 19 other local fair housing organizations across the country, reached a landmark settlement of $53 million with Fannie Mae. This settlement resolves a case that arose from allegations that Fannie Mae treated foreclosures in communities of color differently from those that existed in non-minority or white neighborhoods. So let me take you back to, I'm going to actually go back to, we all think of the foreclosure crisis going back to 2008, but I'm going to go back to 2001. In 2001, we, being Hope and our partners in the community, began seeing in the African-American communities predatory lending and scams, resulting in the foreclosures of homes. And then, of course, the predatory lending with the exotic loan products swept the nation. And in 2008, we had a mortgage crisis, and the differential treatment of foreclosures in neighborhoods of color exacerbated the damage caused by that crisis, and it impeded recovery from the crisis for neighborhoods of color that had already been disproportionately impacted. Black and Latino consumers were actively targeted because of those subprime loans. So you saw more foreclosures and you saw, of course, more predatory lending. So in Black and Latino neighborhoods, they were 2 and 2.5 times more likely to be foreclosed on. So what you would see are larger inventories or foreclosures in neighborhoods of color. And let's get a picture kind of what we're talking about. After the crisis, Fannie Mae's portfolio of foreclosed or real estate owned properties, they ballooned. In 2011, Fannie Mae repaired 89,800 of those properties, and they sold 244,000. And as of 2020, their portfolio was still at 17,500. So let's take you to the lawsuit. In 2016, the case was filed. There were allegations against Fannie Mae after a 4-year investigation. So the investigation started in 2012, but across the country, more than 2,300 Fannie Mae owned foreclosed properties in 39 metropolitan areas in the country were examined, and that includes Miami-Dade and Broward counties. It was counted as one area, but we serve both counties. But in the investigation, it's actually counted as 2. There were more than 49,000 photographs collected during the investigation. They revealed poorly maintained properties in Black and Latino neighborhoods, especially when you compared them to those neighborhoods that had white or non-minority residents in them. So this case is brought under the Fair Housing Act, which is Title 8 of the Civil Rights Act of 1968. The Fair Housing Act is based on constitutional principles, those being equal access and due process. Its dual mission is to eliminate housing discrimination, but also promote racial residential integration. The Fair Housing Act, Congress intended to be broadly construed, meaning that when you interpret the Fair Housing Act and determine who is covered by the law and what housing transactions are covered by the law, you're going to see that expanded to be far enough reach to cover as many people as possible. An aggrieved party is anyone that's hurt, and to cover as many transactions as possible. So when we look at vacant land that's intended for residential real estate, that's going to be covered, as well as walking through the rental or the sales, the development of residential real estate, folks buying, people moving in, being evicted, being foreclosed upon, and even in this particular case, the court said it does in fact cover the maintenance of an inventory of foreclosed homes. What we also saw in terms of who could be hurt were not only fair housing organizations like ourselves, but in the Fannie Mae case, the court recognized that that maintenance was covered, but also the Supreme Court in 2015 recognized, when I talk about that broad construction, that a city could be hurt. So the city of Miami, as the result of foreclosures being left in its neighborhoods of color, it's predominantly African-American communities, brought a case against Bank of America and other banks, citing injury to its tax base and also its need to then spend extra resources on maintaining those properties in the jurisdiction. The case went all the way up to the United States Supreme Court, and the United States Supreme Court recognized the ability of a city to bring a fair housing case if it is injured by discriminatory practices. The case went back down because, of course, you have to prove that the actions of a party caused your injury. But it was very important to have that decision in 2015 where our United States Supreme Court said, yes, a city is also an aggrieved party if it is harmed by discriminatory practices. So that was something great that came out of this case. But looking at the allegations specifically with regard to the Fair Housing Act and those properties, when you look at the regulations that interpret the Fair Housing Act that are issued by HUD, it clearly says that failing or delaying maintenance or repair of the sale or rental of dwellings because of race is prohibited under the Fair Housing Act. So here, in our case, we were looking at the maintenance and repairs of homes in neighborhoods of color versus white neighborhoods. Also, under the Fair Housing Act, it is unlawful to make unavailable or deny housing to anyone because of their race, national origin, etc. So making unavailable or denying, if the poor maintenance of an REO or foreclosed property in a neighborhood makes it undesirable to purchasers, it could otherwise make that property unavailable. And also in the HUD regs interpreting the Fair Housing Act, it is unlawful because of protected bases like race and national origin, color, et cetera, to restrict or attempt to restrict the choices of a person by your words or your conduct in seeking, negotiating for buying, renting, or renting a dwelling so as to perpetuate segregation. So when you segregate, perpetuate segregated housing patterns or discourage or obstruct choices in a community or neighborhood or development, that can also result in a violation of the Fair Housing Act. So these were the allegations made in the case and the foundation of the case. So just taking a look at this map, we were all across the country, from East Coast to West Coast, from North to South with the investigations. And of course, it says Miami, but we did include Broward County. So it is the Miami and Fort Lauderdale greater areas that were part of the investigation. How did we conduct this investigation? Usually when we do testing in housing, we approach the house, we ask a housing provider about the availability of the housing. We might check the housing for accessibility for people with disabilities, that sort of thing. But this was a brand new methodology at the time that had been put into place by the National Fair Housing Alliance. So neighborhoods were identified as either predominantly white, predominantly Latino, predominantly African American, or a combination of both, or majority minority. So you took the neighborhoods and identified those that had high rates of foreclosures in zip codes. And then we took off and went out into the field and evaluated those properties within those zip codes. So 100% of the properties that I'm talking about today were Fannie Mae properties, and they were foreclosures examined in Miami-Dade and or Broward counties. And again, it was a 4-year investigation. The bulk of our investigations actually occurred between 2012 and 2014. But here's what we looked at. We looked at curb appeal. Was there accumulated trash, overgrown grass, shrubbery? We looked at the structure. Was it unsecured? The windows, the doors, fences. We took a look at the actual structure. Any signage. Was the property being marketed by a real estate professional? Was it being marketed as a distressed property? Was there no indication as to what the property status was at all? Also, we took a look at the paint and the siding of the housing to see if anything was damaged, missing, broken, peeled, depending on the construction of the house. Also took a look at the gutters, whether or not there was water or mold damage. And we also looked at the utilities. So now we're going to take a look at the actual properties in Miami-Dade and Broward, just a few, not all of them. But here is an overview of the investigation that was conducted in South Florida, well, Miami-Dade and Broward. Palm Beach County was also included in this investigation. So we had 64 between 2012 and 2014. So this was the bulk of the investigations. There were additional, I think an additional 4 before the lawsuit was filed. But here's the data on those primary 64. 43 were in predominantly African-American communities, 3 in predominantly Hispanic, 2 in predominantly non-white communities, and 15 in predominantly white communities. If we all understand the dynamic, first of all, of Miami-Dade County being majority minority, but again, I have to stress, you had a disproportionate number of foreclosures in neighborhoods of color where those predatory loans were targeted and where there were disproportionate numbers of homes affected by those predatory loans and resulting foreclosures. So here's a map that gives you an idea of where the properties were. The very dark purple on the map would be predominantly African Americans or communities where it's 55% or more African American. Where you have the lavender color, it's 50% or more Hispanic, and our 50% or more white would be white, and 50% or more that's actually a majority non-white would be pink. So looking at the dots themselves, the factors that we talked about, that I just spoke about, were our deficiencies. So we actually identified deficiencies in the property. Where you have a green dot, there were 4 or fewer deficiencies. Where there are orange dots, you had 5 to 9 deficiencies, and red, 10 or more deficiencies. So when we look at the red dots, I'll start in South Dade. You'll see that the first is a predominantly African American community. There is a majority non-white where there is an orange dot, but looking towards the center here, majority Hispanic neighborhood, we've got 4 just red dots, again, 10 or more deficiencies. Looking at the purple area, which is a predominantly African American neighborhood, the majority of those dots are red, with some being orange. And as we move up into Broward County, there's a green dot in this white neighborhood, as well as a couple of orange. And at the top, as we see this African American neighborhood closer to Fort Lauderdale, more of the red and the orange, very few green. And I will say this, our neighborhoods of color are plentiful, and we see very few that are green, and the overall neglect, I believe, speaks volumes to the treatment of our communities, our diverse communities here in South Florida. So when we really just kind of contrast this almost in black and white, when we take the majority non-white and majority white, this really gives you a better picture of what it looks like. So your majority non-white neighborhoods, here where most of your foreclosures actually are, and the red and the orange let you know what the condition of those properties happen to be. And of those that had 4 or fewer deficiencies, those green dots, they are sitting in the predominantly white neighborhoods. So let's actually take a look at some of them. This is a property that is in an African-American community, African-American neighborhood. There's no for sale sign on this property. There's no securing of this fence here to let someone know there's a boarded window here in the front, whether as opposed to a clear, and I'm not going to be able to give you the name of the product, but it's more of a clear plexiglass type material that mimics more of a window appearance than wood that is rotting, etc. So when we take a look around this particular house, again, jalousie windows, more wood put in place, but windows that are actually open that could give access to this property, and actually one that's broken and sitting in disrepair. Now we go to this neighborhood, taking a look, we've got a real estate sign outside. It looks pretty good from the front. And again, we're in a majority non-white neighborhood. Let's go around the back. The house was not secured. So vandals were able to get into the property and destroy what's inside here. There is a sliding glass door also slightly ajar, left open at that property. So unsecured properties allowed for destruction inside of the properties. Also criminal activity and, just danger to children. And speaking of which, also unsecured pools, when there's access to a backyard and an unsecured pool, that leaves that open to children, non-swimmers, that is a danger to them. And when they're unkept, in this particular pool, we found tadpoles actually swimming because this property was not being maintained. This pool wasn't being kept clean. You now have tadpoles swimming that will turn into frogs. Here, we've got an unsecured gate, giving access to property. And actually, I believe this might be the same property where it doesn't look so bad, where you can see things from a street view. But when you go onto the property here, there's just garbage that's accumulated and been left. So this isn't garbage that has just breezed onto the property with a wind. This is accumulated trash and things that have been dumped and just left on the property. You see with the fencing, et cetera. There's also just overgrowth of weeds and shrubbery, et cetera. And again, more trash. So this just gives you another view of the garbage that was left and the condition of the property. Here again, dead and overgrown shrubbery, greenery in the property, rotted wood left on the property. With things falling on top of the garbage, you have an idea of how long it had been left in this state. Again, just more trash, pallets, I believe that's what these happen to be, stacked and just left. The servicers or the property owners, the banks who own the property, have servicers who are required to clean out these properties. And clean out does not mean take the contents and throw it outside. It's the entire property. They're to sweep the entire property of garbage, et cetera. So here, more severely overgrown shrubbery. And in this house, we actually looked at the records of this particular property, and it sold for only $80,000, while the average home price in the neighborhood at the time was $150,000 and up. So what that does, of course, to the entire neighborhood is drives the value of the homes down as opposed to up when you're having sales that are lower than what a house should be valued at. So here we have another property. Again, we've got a marketing sign, looks good from the front, going in around the back. Again, overgrowth, things just left to grow up along the side of the house to where you can't even move along the side here. Complete overgrowth. Here's just layers and layers of leaves. You can see from the actual leaves themselves, the progression of decay of the leaves, and the multiple layers of the leaves give you an indication of how long this property has gone without being cleaned out, swept out, maintained, and just more garbage here being left at the property. And here's an example of those well-maintained properties in the white neighborhoods that we took a look at. So what you expect to see, and like I said, you may see some trash. This is probably a passerby dropping something, but here you've got a well-maintained yard. There's nothing broken. There's a real estate sign outside marketing the property for sale. This is something that somebody would want to buy and would be interested in buying. There's a pool at this property. There were locks on the gate, so there's no access to this pool. It's secured, safe, and the water is clean and it is blue. Here's another property, again, front cleaned out, sign outside, grass has been cut. When you go around the sides of the house, hedges are trimmed, grass is cut, windows are in good shape, house is secure. Same with the pool. There's a padlock, so no one can enter the screened-in patio and have access to that pool. The property is secure. So here's an overall summary of what we took a look at with regard to those 64 properties. I've already shared with you what neighborhoods they were in, but when we looked in the neighborhoods of color, what we saw was 59% of those properties having significant trash or debris left on the property. 49% of the properties in communities of color had that overgrown and dead shrubbery. 43% had unsecured, broken, or boarded windows. And in 67% of the properties, there were actually holes in the structure of the home. Those should be patched up and painted over. when you have these types of properties sitting in our communities, these poorly maintained REO dwellings, they diminish home values for surrounding homeowners. They become a problem when a property owner of any kind abandons their basic responsibilities of ownership, like routine maintenance. You know, you've got negative spillover that affects those neighboring properties, and especially when they're concentrated. So when you have a large number of, so we're only looking at one entity owning foreclosures. There were multiple in neighborhoods. So what we saw in South Florida were neighborhoods that had many of those foreclosed homes. And research will link foreclosed, vacant, and abandoned properties to reduced property values, increased crime, increased risk to health and welfare, and increased costs for municipal governments. In some communities, you had neighbors who took it upon themselves to cut the grass, to make sure that there weren't creatures that moved in, and to just make certain that their own neighborhood didn't have an eyesore. They didn't have to look at an eyesore in their neighborhood, and also keep the children and folks in the neighborhoods safe. So what is the result of this lawsuit? In this particular lawsuit, there is $53 million overall, but 35 million of that 53 is going to go into community investment. And that does include Miami-Dade and Broward counties. It will also include Palm Beach County. The Fair Housing Center of the Greater Palm Beaches is the party that will be implementing the programs that will happen in their county. But in Miami-Dade and Broward, it will be HOPE. And we will be promoting home ownership, neighborhood stabilization. We do that through providing accessible features to people with disabilities in their homes so that they may remain in place. And there's also some rehab to houses that's done through the neighborhood stabilization piece of this, access to credit, as well as more property rehabilitation and access, as well as residential development. We take a look at what's going on and where we think we can have the most impact. There was a similar settlement with Wells Fargo early on after our investigations. I want to say 2013. And those are the types of projects that were invested in the communities. For example, the VFW there in Broward County had contributions to the accessibility from its new building, from its parking lot into its new building, where they provide services for veterans. Over 150 families, or about 150 families, received down payment and closing cost assistance, and many families received accessible features to their homes, ramps, accessible bathrooms, as well as wheelchair lifts to some properties where that was appropriate, a railing to get a person with a disability from one room to the next, and to even be able to move a person with a disability who needs assistance through a lift into the shower, et cetera. So those are the types of features. Housing counseling was supported, community gardens were also some of the investments that were made. So we could look to see similar community investments as a result of this particular settlement. But there were also some additional responses by Fannie Mae to the need to maintain foreclosures. And so they increased their oversight of maintenance of the properties that they own. They prioritized owner occupants rather than investors as purchasers of REOs, which for HOPE was critical when we dealt with the first round of community investment funds. Putting owner occupants in properties was important because owner occupants make those investments in the community. They're not absentee landlords like a lot of the investors who purchased properties, foreclosed properties here in South Florida. They live in the community. They're the folks that hire the local maintenance guy for the yard, painters for repairs. So when you look at the economy, your local economy, having those those owner occupants results in a very different level of care and maintenance, and also engagement of local businesses. So definitely making an impact. You know, it's for our area, it's not a whole lot of money. Being real about all of this, it really isn't a whole lot of money, but where you can make greater impact, I believe, is with families for generations. When we rebuild the home ownership levels of African Americans and Latinos, we are at about the same level, if not lower, than the home ownership rates for African American Latinos as we were when housing discrimination was legal. So we've got a lot of rebuilding to do. So when we can put families back in homes and begin to start closing that gap, we begin to close the wealth gaps. We begin to allow these families to set themselves up for generational wealth. And so that, I believe, is the impact in working with our partners in getting owner occupants and families into these homes. Fannie Mae is also ensuring that it complies with fair housing laws, including fair housing training to its employees, as well as its vendors. So we're talking about a case that's really old, and I just wanted to make note of something. And this could very well be the world according to Keenya, but on his first day in office, President Biden issued an executive order on advancing racial equity and support for unserved communities through the federal government. And then with that, there was a memorandum on the 26th, just a few days later. And in that memorandum, you recognize the central role that the government played in implementing and continuing discriminatory housing practices through the United States. And so through that memo, there was a directive to the federal agencies to take a look at where their agency may have played a part in this and where they can address reversing this. And it would also call for funds to be invested in addressing discriminatory housing practices and policies. So seeing that housing being central to just to this administration, being a critical component of focus for this administration, I believe that it did in fact play a role in getting us to this landmark settlement and getting these funds to invest in our communities. And HUD actually issued a statement 2 days after this case settled, saying it's their hope that the case brings much needed positive outcomes to the underserved communities, and then hoping that the mortgage lenders across the country take steps to avoid fair housing violations in their own REO portfolios. And I share that because I'll say this much about it: there are still 2 cases that are similar, still pending, that we're hoping to resolve, and hoping that we will get the same type of response and reaction, so that we can then invest in our communities through the same means. So with that, I thank you all for your attention. I think this is, again, it's incredible. It's been long, because as you see, we started the investigations 10 years ago, but you know, we hung in there with our partners, and I give full credit to the National Fair Housing Alliance for leading the efforts, and the fair housing organizations across the country for conducting the investigations and for sticking through the litigation here. It's been a long journey, but I'm really looking forward to the outcomes, and at some point, hopefully sharing with you what those community investments look like. Thank you all so much.
Robertson, thank you very much. Really appreciate your brief. We have time for a couple of questions. She can't hear me. Oh, I can't hear her.
She's back on mute.
I see you nodding yes. And thumbs up.
I gave you a thumbs up. I'm shaking my head. Yes, I'm here for you.
All right. Any questions? Nobody's at it.
morning.
Good morning.
I reside in the city of West Fargo. I was just curious on the first study that you discussed, how did you all select the areas in which you were going to study those nuances in those particular areas?
If I'm understanding the question correctly, you're asking how did we select the areas? And the answer to that was looking at the volume or the presence of foreclosed properties in those zip codes. And zip code was also used to identify the racial makeup of the neighborhoods where those properties existed.
Okay, thank you. In addition to that, I have another question. The $35 million, is that something that was awarded to be distributed from a trust, or in which areas would that money be utilized in, if in fact they were not included in the study?
So the 39 metropolitan areas that were on the map will split the 35 million in terms of those community investments. And so a portion of that it will be coming to South Florida. So you're splitting those monies between the 39 communities.
Okay, and will that money be relegated to the county, or how does those communities know how to access those types of funds or the programs that the funds will be used to create?
So Hope was a party to the lawsuit. So we will be administering those funds and those programs, and following the same, I guess the same approach as we did with Wells. We've partnered with different organizations in Dade and Broward, targeting first and foremost our community partners, those who have been supporters of fair housing, as well as those whose work we're familiar with. We've partnered with those entities to make those investments. So when the funds actually have landed. The board of directors of Hope has a community investment committee that will meet, and they will take a look at what we can do. So for example, with regard to home ownership, the market is such right now that we don't know how impactful we can be with new purchases, down payment and closing cost assistance, simply because it's very difficult for a buyer in the market right now. Will we provide those services? Yes, and we've done those through two of our partners, one in Dade, one in Broward. And we would just renew those relationships and try to get folks into houses where we can help. We have one partner that assesses homes for features that are needed by people with disabilities and has the relationships with the contractors. So some funds will go there. It will depend on what's already out there in the community. We want to maximize, because it's not a lot of money. When you take 35 million, you split it among 39 communities, and then you administer it, it's not a whole lot of money. So we will be looking to see where we can leverage or maybe enhance something that's already in place for that to be more effective. So we'll be evaluating what's in place, where we think we can be the most impactful, and that'll be done through the board of directors of Hope, as well as my staff, and we'll be making those decisions and lining up those partnerships accordingly.
Well,
And we intend to move quickly. In fact, I've already initiated. I've already reached out to our partner who has people with disabilities right now waiting for accessible bathrooms and ramps, and we'd like to get those folks served as soon as possible.
thank you for your response, and I'm just going to leave you with this. As indicated, I'm from a small city of West Park, and I hope that the board of directors consider doing some fantastic work within that community. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
We have one more question. Got one more, Mr. Robertson.
Okay.
So my question was, what was the average turnover time between the maintenance on the REOs and minority communities versus non-minority?
Can I have the question repeated for me, please?
Yes, what was the average turnover time between the maintenance that was done on the REO properties in minority communities versus non-minority communities?
There was no assessment of the turnover time, and I'm not certain as to what you're speaking to regarding the turnover time.
Let's say that the delay between the maintenance. So was maintenance being conducted on properties much faster, and how fast were those maintenances being done on those other properties versus the minority properties?
So the methodology did not follow the maintenance of, because the maintenance on properties varied depending upon where they were, but the methodology did not follow the specific vendors and when they showed up where. There was an assessment of properties that were sitting in the foreclosure inventory and a look-see of what the condition was of that property.
Question online?
No question. Where can we read more about that?
Okay, Ms. Robertson.
What I'll do is, and I do see in the chat, where can you read more about the analysis and the settlement? So nationalfairhousing.org has the full, there's a copy of the settlement agreement, as well as the full study. So what I'll do, as soon as we finish the questions and before I sign off, I'm going to drop the link in the chat so that you're able to share it.
Okay, any more questions? Well, thank you, Ms. Robertson. We greatly appreciate your briefing.
Thank you all so much.
And thank you again. Thank you for attending the summit and speaking at the summit. And thank you very, very, very much. We'll now turn that over to Janine.
Come on, property black. You guys will show up for me. Thank you. Guys, how are we feeling? Good, good, good. So we have coming up next our breakout sessions. So it'll be our time to get up, to stretch, use the bathroom, grab coffee. We have two really, really interesting conversations, and I'm not just saying that because I'm participating in one of them. But the two conversations that we're going to have today are one, building community youth commitment in our communities, and then the small business development panel, which are resources, succession planning, venture capital, prepping for government programs, and pandemic recovery. We are wanting this, like Cornell was like, we really want everybody to be engaging in this. And if you have questions, ask them. Like, this is going to be very conversation style. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to engage with the panel. If there's something you want to ask me or any of the panelists, please, 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 we're highly encouraging you to do that. I can't stress it enough. I may say it like 5 more times before I can say it. Anyway, so I am going to give everybody a mental break. The panels are directly across the hall. So when you go out of these doors, you'll see the signage. And also I will over there as well. But take time, get up, stretch, grab a coffee, grab a tea, a pastry, and we will see you